So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever people are in the world. It's me, Marissa True, back with another episode of TezTalks Radio. And today I'm joined by Valerie Whitacre, who's the head of art based at the Trilitech office in London. Hi, Valerie. How are you today?
Hi, Marissa. Doing really well. Thanks. How about you?
I'm grand. So I think your name has floated around the ecosystem for a fair while now. And to give people a little introduction, can you just share a bit more about what you do?
Of course. So as you mentioned, I work out of the Trilitech office in London. The Trilitech office is a hub of the Tezos ecosystem. My title is head of art. I was hired to lead the art vertical of the Tezos entities and ecosystem. And that's an inter-entity team, effectively. And what we really do is we look at different opportunities, both in business development as well as the community, to really help grow what is already an organically originated, incredibly vibrant, rich tapestry of creators and collectors, as well as to provide new opportunities for tools and wallets and marketplaces that service that organic community, organically grown community. It's been a really thrilling journey so far, especially being a non-crypto native with a completely different background. And I have to say, I've been absolutely moved and really driven by what I've seen already happening. So it's a real pleasure to be here.
So before we dig into, the renowned vibrancy of the Tezos art ecosystem, I always want to start the show by digging into the beginnings of your own story. Like, what drew you into the world of blockchain? What attracted you to Tezos in particular? Like, what was the story from what brought you from traditional art, sorry, to blockchain based art?
So I spent the last 15 years of my career as a photography dealer, mostly in London, though I had my own practice for a while where I enjoyed being a bit of a digital nomad before that was a thing. And my attraction to photography was really the tension between what is art as a creative practice and what is a craft or what is a scientific output even. That tension between art and technology was kind of fundamental to the medium itself. And I've enjoyed many an opportunity to discuss with painting collectors and sculpture collectors what makes photography an art form, both as an object, as something that can be made in thousands of different print techniques and framed in a million ways and executed upon with multimedia, and why it's valuable despite the fact that it's theoretically infinitely reproducible. So at some point, I want to say it was in the sort of second round of COVID. I was still working at the gallery I spent the last 7 years of my career at. I'm here in London, a gallery called Hamilton's, and discovered that the main platforms for online art retail, I won't name names, suddenly had this influx of some really, really rare, incredible photography by some of the top names in the history of the medium. And what became sort of abundantly clear was that all of the underground fake commerce was suddenly showing up at the top levels, and our major collectors were losing money. And it's not like that we didn't know that there was sort of an underground movement of these fakes, but it's a completely different thing when you have a sort of pop up in an airport versus you're directly competing authentic work with inauthentic work. And so my discovery of blockchain technology was really around that tension, that particular conflict, I should say. I became incredibly passionate about it. I went down different rabbit holes, as many as I could, lost a significant amount of sleep. And serendipitously, about 2 months later, was approached by a recruiter about this position within a blockchain ecosystem, and thought to myself, well, this recruiter must be mad. I must be mad, but I have to see where this could possibly go, and have since discovered not only the millions of other applications that there might be for Tezos as a blockchain technology in general, but also, of course, the creators and blockchain as a medium of art that has so much in common with photography. In fact, I could mirror entire discussions that I've had in the last 20 years to those that I have today, whether it be with museums or with art collectors, from that legacy art world. And it's been a really thrilling transition, to be able to apply my knowledge and experience from that space in that discourse, and to bring that, to the table on behalf of all the people making art, either directly using blockchain technology or using it as a method for transactions.
Hmm. And to dig into, your beginnings within the photography space and venturing into understanding the value behind an art medium that's almost infinitely reproducible. Can you tell me a bit more about how, your art career led into that point and how it actually complements your role today? Because obviously, as you just mentioned, there's a lot of parallels about the value of something, in contrast to its infinite reproducibility. So, like, how did these worlds merge for you in a way that really complements what you do day to day?
I mean, there's a lot that I do day to day now that's not directly related to this, but to address the question really specifically, I mean, in the art world, we don't have smart contracts, we have social contracts, right? We agree that an addition of five is an addition of five, or that the artist promises not to paint something that looks identical to something that he's sold before. Or in the case where the actual sort of rarity is actually established in the minutia as opposed to the overall theme, sometimes it's really, it can be quite specific, but it's still based around an agreement. It's based around a trust. And markets are always based around trust and confidence. And, I think we've seen that in the past week. And we saw it, years ago, in the second crash of my life, in terms of economy in general. In terms of relating that discussion, to the artwork that I'm seeing on the blockchain, I mean, I think it's really quite, to me, very simple, though there are still painting collectors who won't collect photography for exactly this reason, which is that, the artist must maintain ownership over whatever form of the original he or she or they see fit. Um, and that might be a digital negative and the ability to put it on a t-shirt or a billboard. It might be a file. It might be a code, a piece of code. The ownership comes when the piece is, and I'll use another sort of industry to industry term, is signed, right? I mean, I can have a photograph, and if it's not signed, it's not validated by the artist, right? And what the blockchain and crypto art in particular kind of takes from photography is that signature. And we do that now when we transact, when we collect NFTs, we also sign, we countersign. And that to me is a sort of magical, re-envisioning of that particular market structure, which previously was just based on handshakes. In terms of how it applies to my day to day, I think it's incredibly essential to the conversations I have around education.
Mhm.
Education that, we hope with significant progress will lead to adoption. And on top of that is also really fundamental to my conversations with creators around their connection to the history of art and how art has always relied on technology, and that the legacy art world, as conflicting a statement as this might seem, is actually, it's not the enemy of progress. It simply hasn't adapted to understanding what this is yet. And I feel immensely privileged to have had somewhat of a leap, though I can't claim to have all of the technical language or expertise. So I think to kind of summarize it, it gives me the right language to communicate both to the current, the community on Tezos, or the individuals rather within that community with whom I've spoke, because I certainly haven't spoken to everyone yet. Also to museum curators, auction houses, brands, designers, musicians, etc. But it also gives me that passion in terms of the correlation to really, for lack of a better word, sell what that translation means, and to drive interest, whether it be at a dinner table or at a business meeting.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, exactly as you say, your privileged position of having spent a lot of time in the traditional art world and then having ventured very much into this new space, it's almost like you have a clear vision of what new solutions are being presented for age-old problems, except that you have this sort of debate going on about the ongoing relevance of traditional art world structures in this new realm and what's going to stay particularly powerful and what might actually need to change or adapt a bit more quickly than expected. And I mean, in the past year or so, you and I have worked fairly closely together on a variety of different projects, and you've held the role for, I want to say, about a year now, maybe less. So
A
I
little
want to
bit.
ask kind of, sure, what are some of the major things you've actually worked on? And, what are the things that are in the pipeline that you'd like to get people excited about?
I mean, I think the one of the most important moments in my past working within the Tezos ecosystem was really the moments at the Art Basel fairs. The learnings from those, the ability to meet people, really learn directly from creators and platforms who have been incredibly generous with their time, as well as expressing a great deal of faith about my good intentions, my wanting to learn, and really helping to reinforce the organic growth that's already been demonstrated in the art community. I think what's going on with the Web3 Arts and Culture Labs. I mean, my colleague Diane Drubet has kind of leapt and bounded in terms of the progress that's being made in conversations in high-level institutions as a result of that program, which was a collaboration of many people, but certainly led and driven by her. I think the signing of the partnership with the Serpentine Galleries was certainly a significant moment, but also a source of many learnings that we're hoping to take into the future. And so I think in terms of things to get excited about, the summer exhibition at Serpentine Galleries is with one of the OG sort of Tezos creators. His name is Gabriel Masson. I only met him, what was it, 2 evenings ago. Had the pleasure of finally making his acquaintance in person. And he's incredibly passionate about the Tezos ecosystem and about this exhibition and building Web3 components on that. The Serpentine Galleries is a tour de force in the traditional art world in general, despite having its location pretty specifically in London and in central London. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more education, a lot more use case showcasing. I mean, I think the traditional model of branded partnerships in the art vertical has brought us to a stage where we can now evolve upon those learnings and really drive activity and again kind of reinforce that organic growth across different types of artwork to different types of collectors who may not know that they're collectors yet, but anyone who has a devoted sunglass brand, or who has a favorite museum that they go to, or a favorite cinema that they attend, is, whether from a consumer perspective or a purely aesthetic perspective, a collector. And yeah, we've got a couple of different events in the pipeline, certainly a lot going on with our partnership with Champ Medici for the Champ Medici Art Fund, which rolls into an extension on the permanent art collection, originally curated by Misan Harriman, who I'm sure many people listening to this podcast will already have heard of and from, because I think very recently I did a TED talk with him, which I enjoyed immensely, and really, yeah, driving forward the conversation on top of all of that in initial time and investment.
Right, so there's a lot of ongoing initiatives. There's new initiatives in the pipeline. It's obviously been a very, very active year and year to come. But I want to kind of take us back 2 years ago, where Tezos was actually primarily known for its art marketplace, Hic et Nunc, and Object.com. And now we're seeing a multitude of art platforms from FX Hash to Versum and integrations with Rarible. So from where you sit, like, what does this mean for the Tezos ecosystem as a whole? Because obviously the art ecosystem has almost not slowed down despite macroeconomic circumstances. If anything, it gets more enthusiastic, more vigorous. So what does that all say to you? What does that activity represent?
I think there's an element of diversification that I think is really essential to this story and to the history, both past and present, on Tezos. Whether it be the verse and the first opportunity ever to kind of collect poetry as a completely different medium that you couldn't consume in that way prior, whether it's merging the idea of collectibles as a community building asset or a token for a DAO and actual fine artwork being sold and minted within the Tezos ecosystem. What it represents really for me is that people are choosing Tezos because of the community, and as they rightfully should, frankly, in my view. But they're not choosing it without thinking, what can I add? And that diversification is what's going to help lead to adoption. It's what's going to help drive different audiences who are unfamiliar with blockchain in general, unfamiliar with crypto art, generative art, different mediums that you can now collect, like music or even parts of musical scores, that can really ignite passion in potential collectors and in potential participants. But and this is not really to backtrack much as to say that I'm really, really passionate also about how this helps to create a more inclusive ecosystem, because not everyone is as courageous as the Hic et Nunc original crowd, right? And that courage to really put your artwork out there, to really start talking about it and to share and collaborate, is a courage that I would argue not many artists from the legacy art world have, especially the pressure to market your own artwork, create reserve lists, really be on Twitter all the time, be on Discord all the time. The more we can diversify the platforms, integrating Tezos or building on Tezos, the more people are going to feel comfortable participating and creating and really driving forward adoption, growth, but also new types of art we have yet to imagine. I mean, this ecosystem is so young. And I think there's a consensus, at least within the Tezos ecosystem and the entities, whether it be Trilitech or Nomadic Labs or otherwise, that innovation is really the key. And we just can't wait to see what comes of it.
Yeah, because exactly as you say, there's so many other pieces of the puzzle that need to be added. Marketplaces are just one of them. Diversity is something that I think is going to be an ongoing and infinite process. But, what else needs to be cultivated to ensure that Tezos kind of retains its top position as the leading art blockchain?
It's a really difficult question to answer because, I can say that the last 8 months of my working with Trilitech and with the different members of the team of the art vertical, especially Deanne, there's been a lot of learnings, but those learnings have been based largely on metrics that are fairly intangible. They haven't been based on, the number of contract calls or what DApp Radar is putting out there. They've been based on person to person conversations and addressing challenges, whether it be due to education or language. And so I guess I can target a few things that we feel, or that the arts vertical team kind of agrees are needed to be developed, and that's really educational platforms that meet people where they are. And that's incredibly challenging because museums and auction houses don't use the same language. Auction houses and galleries most of the time too, but artistic studios across different genres require different language for effectively the same thing, whether it's printing, minting, publishing. all these different words that can either bring people together or alienate
Mhm.
people that are trying to learn about this space. So I would really want to focus, even though it might seem to the vast majority of listeners that we've already overcome this, I think the educational piece is really just so, so key. And being there, showing up, being present, making sure that we're having those conversations with curators, that we're having conversations with libraries and with archives and with studios, whether they be incentivized to preserve history or to innovate or to captivate audiences. All of these different stakeholders are essential, and we need different language and different approaches for all of them. So, yeah, I would say that the bespoke approach that the Tezos ecosystem has taken already is very important, but the learnings are really that we need to build upon that quickly. And that's, I think, are really our next priority.
So I guess in that respect, it's still a highly fragmented process where we're dealing with all of these sort of splintered parts, all of which have value, but we're trying to see how all of them fit together in a way that's actually constructive and is going to create something that's greater than the sum of its parts. It's almost like it kind
Absolutely.
of reminds me of that Japanese principle of Kinsugi, where you piece together broken pieces with gold and it produces something all the more beautiful once you understand its greater form. But until you get to that stage, you're just dealing with shards of material. And so
I
I
don't
think it's
think that's
going
a
to,
bad analogy at all. And maybe it's not always gold. Maybe sometimes it's a different metal. I think it actually can be that specific in terms of the bonding agent that we're looking for. I think relies on that person to person contact, as online as this kind of experience might seem in principle. It also relies on wording, on really kind of embracing where people already are. And that does take time. More immediately, I think there are moments that we'll be able to celebrate in terms of events coming up, in terms of celebrating certain platform moments and tool building. But within that sphere, to really drive, again, to kind of honor that organic growth, we need to make sure that people see what's happened. And at the moment, as historic as that moment has been, is, and is currently still developing, we need to shout loud and proud about it in a way that people understand it. And so there is a sort of sensitive approach to wanting to make that happen without alienating people first.
right. And on this theme of fragmentation, like obviously with any emerging technology, we would see a lot of that to begin with because everyone's trying to develop solutions they think would work best. But then we're also, it's also evident that there's a lot of fragmentation in the traditional art world, and
Mhm.
that's kind of down to legacy silos and infrastructure that's preventing the cross pollination of different aspects of that space. And then the third tier is the fragmentation between the traditional art world and this blockchain art world. And I think oftentimes there's this sense of rivalry or competition or resistance between the adoption of this new technology in the traditional art world. So, what is it that you think art institutions, legacy aged institutions, need to actually know about blockchain and why this technology is so important to their industry? Like, what is the one thing or the key messages that we need to relay to the old school art world that really will drive this message home of this technology is to help you, it's not to compete with you per se?
I think there's two elements to this, and the first is that the blockchain itself is an infrastructure piece, right? But I should mention, I spent a number of months at an auction house, pretty big one. I won't say who it is, but I guess everyone can go to my LinkedIn and see. But I'll just pay them the respect of not calling them out on this. But back in 2009, when I was working with them, their catalogs were beautiful, most beautiful catalogs I'd ever seen. I still have them collected up in my loft. But they were being written on DOS. And I used to have nightmares of that white flashing light, much less having an actual database of what they'd sold before, right? And even to this day, the ledger of what artwork has been sold where is on a website called ArtNet, which I hugely respect, by the way, but especially in photography with editions, I have to do hours of research to find out if one photograph that was sold May 2008 is the same photograph that I'm seeing at auction today. There is absolutely no way to link those aspects. And these are significant problems because they cost people time, and time is money, but more than that, time is time. Time is time that you can spend with your family. Time is something that we should try to preserve as much as we can, alongside our enjoyment of the artwork. It shouldn't be fraught with admin errors. So I think we can really focus on existing problems and existing obstructions as use cases. Of course, we can go much, much deeper into what it would mean to have a global catalog raisonné of the history of ceramics, as opposed to 3 ceramic specialists around the world knowing where everything is. I think from a philosophical perspective, as well as an infrastructure perspective, that to me just seems absurd because we have a way to solve that. But second, and I do believe more importantly, is that we need to be artist led. The art world only changes when innovation forces it to, not technology itself. It's never changed just because technology has asked it to. At some point, DOS became irrelevant because it couldn't support the file sizes that it was trying to link to. You had to innovate. You had to adopt new technology. And I think the best kind of instance of demonstrating how pivotal this is was in October when I was speaking to the new director of fairs, Vincenzo De Bellis of Art Basel. It was the first time anyone from Art Basel had been on a panel, and I wanted to end the panel with what people were excited about for the future. And Vincenzo's hand shot up. He hadn't been eager the entire conversation, and I don't fault him for that. It can be an incredibly intimidating space to speak in if you don't have the background. But what he said astonished me and really thrilled me at the same time. And it was that the Art Basel Fair isn't currently exhibiting NFTs. So some galleries are, and of course the Tezos booth had NFTs from FX Hash, but they weren't exhibiting NFTs as art. And what he said was that the fair is totally ready to do that once it's been completely shaken and awed by a piece that's coming out of Web3. And it's not to say that those pieces haven't been created yet. I'm sure they likely have. It's then the art vertical's job to make sure that those people, those thought leaders from the legacy art world who are not the enemy of Web3, that they have that exposure, that they can finally see it, that their eyes are open. So, insofar as the artist-led approach, that's always going to be, I think, the primary foundation of what drives the team working on art within the Tezos ecosystem.
Hmm. So, needless to say, Art Basel has obviously been on the more bullish end of understanding the merits of the technology and also like the amount of creativity that's occurring in this space. But what are some of the other institutions? We've also mentioned Serpentine, like what that have been more bullish about Tezos in particular as an art chain, and how are they actually responding, or what are their queries when it comes to first taking their first steps into this world?
I mean, I think we've seen several exhibitions that have integrated Tezos artworks or even Tezos custom-built projects, like the Kunsthal Zurich and their Do Your Own Research Dior exhibition last year. Nina Rohrs from the Kunsthal Zurich. She is I feel like she shows up to way more than I do when it comes to the Tezos ecosystem. Serpentine Galleries for sure. I mean, Hans Ulrich has demonstrated to the community of the Serpentine Galleries that the Tezos blockchain is really their chain of choice, that they understand that it comes with the art community that they value. This is a message that I think they're approaching conservatively, but I've certainly heard it more than once, and believe it to be really ingrained. Art Basel, as you said, and I think Art Basel, unlike other fairs, blends the innovation aspect of blockchain and the artistic community with that legitimacy, as opposed to other art fairs who are perhaps creating digital departments to deal with the issue, and to kind of softly, take a sort of risk-based approach. Art Basel just fully dove straight in. I think without revealing too much about the year ahead, what I would say is that there are contemporary institutions that are looking more into exhibition possibilities, also collaborations. And I'd absolutely love the opportunity to kind of build out a small community of people who are willing to do commissions for museums, commissions for creative studios, that sort of thing. I think we're right on the verge of being able to really drive that forward, because there's interest in the technology. There's interest in the fundraising aspect, of course, because museums need it. But the institutions, I think, are taking an artist-led approach, and they're starting to realize that there's a whole genre of art there that they haven't ever been able to exhibit, and that it doesn't require an archive of art to tap into the way that it did with the legacy art world. These people are alive, they're working today, they're wanting and are frankly inspired by art pieces from history. I mean, you look on object.com or even FX Hash and you search for Hokusai's Wave, you're going to find collections of people that have been inspired by that seminal piece. And when it comes to looking at what the British Museum did, tokenizing something that was already in their collection, my view is that they missed a trick not actually approaching an artist or a series of artists, a group of artists, to make
Mhm.
something completely unique for their audience. And that's the approach that I would much prefer to take. And I think the museums are much more comfortable taking as well, given the various barriers to entry, regulatory issues, plenty of other things going on behind the scenes, that do make it very difficult to execute on these types of ideas.
Mhm. And I think it's very interesting, the idea of basically monitoring the direction of the relationship and who kind of holds the power in this equation, and placing the emphasis on the creator themselves or the artists themselves, as applying almost like a soft power or pressure for some of these art institutions to take this technology a bit more seriously and to point them in the right direction. But it is also very reassuring to hear and also to have witnessed a lot of the enthusiasm of some of these, age-old institutions like Art Basel and Serpentine and so on, who have really taken the bull by the horns and just dove right in. But I think in cultivating these relationships, particularly through your role, it's to also demonstrate that there is a long-term view as to what Tezos can provide to these players or these institutions as a whole. And we also have initiatives like the permanent art collection, which we mentioned earlier, with the collection from Misan Haraman, and then you also mentioned Champ Medici. So can you can you explain further how these initiatives, particularly the permanent art collection, actually do serve the long-term commitment to the arts that the foundation holds?
Of course. I mean, I joined right when the articles and the sort of announcements of the permanent art collection were being circulated, and I had the chance to meet Misan for the first time, and he's inspiring. He really is. Someone who's a true creator, but who's managed to also really tap into a group of people who maybe are less vulnerable than he is in terms of his activism, in terms of his ability to communicate and really teach us something with what he's doing. So I'm not at all surprised why the Tezos Foundation chose him to be the first curator. I know there's a lot of discussion around whether or not that was the right decision, whether a single curator should have been the choice, whether a DAO might have been a better option. Um, all that to say, I mean, what he's collected, the diversity within it, I think is powerful. It's very, very powerful. However, whatever opinions people might have around the methodology or the man himself, the collection itself is a momentous occasion for celebration and for I think is an important moment where a blockchain foundation has showed what's possible to legacy institutions. What we have now is a partnership also with Champ Medici for a fund to commission artists. So this is a completely new structure, and certain assets from these commissions will be donated from the artist directly to the permanent art collection. These are not artworks that Champ Medici himself is selecting, but will be creator driven. So trying out these different models and really showcasing to legacy institutions what's possible for the first time, building something like this. Plans to, of course, exhibit. This won't be an overnight project. But it's been in the works for some time. We are the team itself, and I'm working also with certain individuals from the foundation to make sure that we build something really impactful that we can showcase in real life as well as digital opportunities to celebrate what's been built, and not just the individual pieces within it as they exist in an isolated manner, which is still very important, but what themes can we tease out of a blockchain art collection that maybe isn't possible within a museum collection? Um, and being able to kind of liberate some ideas that haven't been explored before, especially when it comes to the global purview of the creators within it. Um, I think on a wider sort of industry uh, kind of discussion, this this choice by the foundation, this proactive choice to create its own moving, evolving, permanent but not closed, growing art collection shows that there is a place for archives of this work to be not only collected but also showcased around the world in a way that's just not possible with physical collections either. So we can't wait to start getting that program up to speed.
What I like about that concept is it's almost flipped a legacy concept, to put a broad term on it, of a permanent art collection, and then flipping the power dynamic and driving it as a bottom up grassroots movement instead, and sort of building it in a different direction and in a different method that I think is going to yield very different results, because it's allowing different voices to come to the fore and different creators to be showcased. And so in that respect, what we're looking at is blockchain art evolving in a very different way to how the traditional art world has been built.
Mm-hmm.
And so it comes down to this controversial debate, which we've explored before on this podcast a few times, but it's this idea of whether, traditional art worlds actually, the traditional art institutions, sorry, should actually take part in order to establish its own legitimacy in this space, like whether that's
Mm-hmm.
critical or necessary at all, or whether there is a circumstance in which, the Web3 art world and the traditional art world can run fairly autonomously or independently of one another.
I'm so glad that you asked that because, of course, being a non crypto native, of course, coming from the legacy art world, that's my comfort zone. So I'm very happy to talk about it with perhaps a bit more confidence than I am some of the other trajectories for crypto art and blockchain based art. But I do absolutely believe there's an autonomous history of art being built right now. I don't think that we need every institution to adopt this as a genre or as an infrastructure. Um, I think there are institutions that have even very recently, in fact, drawn lines in the sand in a similar way that the Tate Modern did. It must have been 30 years ago now. The Tate Modern had a mandate not to collect photography because it didn't believe it was art. And when I moved to London 15 years ago, they just hired their first photography curator. And he still was not exactly given free reign to do whatever he wanted. He had to take a show that was being curated at I believe it was SF MoMA at the time. So do we need this now? I don't believe we do. Do we want it for the future? And when I say we, I mean I refer specifically to the team that I'm working with, the idea of an art vertical within the Tezos ecosystem as opposed to individuals. I think even there are certain artists who have expressed enthusiasm for institutional adoption, for sure. Is it essential for every institution to integrate a blockchain or Web3 into its programming? Should they all? I don't think that's necessary at all. And I think every institution has a different mandate with different stakeholders and should honor that in some way, shape, or form. What I worry about more is when collectors themselves feel that they become tastemakers. And we back in sort of the early 2000s, the big philosophical debate was on whether or not we needed critics. And suddenly we don't really hear about art critics anymore because art critics are always saying that things are bad, or they like or don't like something, and suddenly someone gets money and someone doesn't. And it was a bit of a moment in time where even the legacy art world, as rigid as it was, decided we don't need this group of people. And now I think we're at a discussion point where the collectors maybe have too much influence, where legacy art collectors in particular, especially because they will have inherited much of this from earlier generations, shouldn't maybe have the pedestal all the time, and they currently do. So I'd love, and I do believe that this movement will remind those collectors that that pedestal is ephemeral. It is time-based. It's often built entirely out of the need for the legacy art world to justify its own opinions. And I do think that, the Web3 movement and certainly the Tezos art community is at the forefront of changing the discussion of who makes decisions in this space overall. And I'm really looking forward to seeing some moving and shaking happen.
It's almost like there's this constant wrestling of power, and like it's a different power dynamic in the traditional art realm and the blockchain art realm, and it's sort of mirroring each other with different players being particularly relevant or involved. And so when those fragmented pieces bridge together, it's going to be very interesting to see what the balance looks like after the fact. But if we zoom out of all of that and we look at the crypto and NFT space from a much broader perspective, it's obviously been on shaky ground lately. None of us could have avoided the news cycle with regards to major economic events as it relates to the traditional financial market, or FTX, or Silicon Valley Bank. So how has this actually impacted your work, and the entities that you interact with, and whether it's affected their enthusiasm for this space?
It's been detrimental. I'm At some point, even the most rigid, antiquated institution, auction house, platform, business had their door partially open, like just an invitation to sort of start, if we wanted to meet them where they were. And that's still my primary sort of philosophy around adoption, is meet people where they are and welcome them in, pull them in with the passion that we all have, as opposed to this kind of like yes or no binary question, right? But the majority of those tiny chinks in the armor, those tiny glistening pieces of light, closed quite quickly after FTX.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
certainly within the past week or two with everything that's going on across the traditional banking system, which is just so incredibly disappointing. But I think what that does is it really helps the art vertical team target who's still interested.
Mm-hmm.
We now have a direct line of communication to people who are already primed to understand that there's a difference between speculation, blockchain technology, an artistic community, like Web3 as a movement. And that I think is going to really help us grow faster. So with everything that's going on, I do think there is a silver lining. I'd also really, I think it's really important to highlight I listen to the BBC World Service almost every morning, and that shows my biases for better or worse, but it's a simple podcast, and only twice have I heard mention of blockchain.
Mhm.
And both of them were associated with purely crypto speculation and what was happening with FTX. And crypto outweighed the mentions of blockchain by at least 20 times. There's really been no public exposure to what's going on. And it's a difficult pill to swallow, I think, for traditionalists to understand there's a movement going on that they haven't seen yet, or that is somehow meaningful, because they do the biggest thing that the legacy art world fears is embarrassment. And I think at this stage, there's been enough growth in the space that, for better or worse, when you approach people with what's happened, there's a certain sort of idiot factor that shows up. And that's
Mhm.
not a criticism, it's really just addressing kind of the fear that people have around suddenly not having the confidence or authority that they would have in a contemporary art dialogue, that they don't have the language to participate in the discourse, that they're not able to apply their old philosophies to new philosophies because they're just a bit further behind. Um, my previous boss used to jokingly call himself a dinosaur. I don't believe anyone's a dinosaur. A dinosaur implies that you're already extinct. Um, but I do believe that there are institutions in the legacy art world that are a bit more like alligators and have been around for a while, and they've been doing the same thing. So again, not a criticism. I learn through analogy, so very often I communicate in analogy as well. Um, and the alligators are going to learn to coexist with all these new, vibrant forms of life in a global ecosystem. We are going to cohabitate, but we don't necessarily need one another. So yeah, I hope that answers a few of the past questions as well, kind of in a potentially insulting, but I hope elegant way nonetheless.
No, I mean, I'm very much one for analogies. I learn through that framework myself, so I think that was actually very beautifully put. Um, I think I would have. I like the way you put it. It was better than my original idea, which is to call everyone an ostrich and say you conveniently put your head in the sand the moment you're confronted with, things not going perfectly to plan, and potentially scapegoating technologies that weren't necessarily directly involved in the failures of much bigger institutions than we are currently
Yeah.
discussing. But we, I digress. Um,
I've heard you use the ostrich analogy on this podcast before. I can't remember exactly which talk it was, but it is equally apt insofar as hiding is a more natural instinct than being predatory. But we are
mhm,
also seeing predators in this space, and I think there are. It's unfortunate to see the people who waste their energy snapping at this as if it's a threat, because it's not. And I would hope that the Tezos art community it's as well learns that the trad art world, and you'll notice that I don't use that word very often, isn't an enemy either. For the most part, they're just scared. They're
right.
just as scared as the early adopters who had the courage and the dynamic enthusiasm to jump headfirst into this space. And I think that there's a lot more there. My role isn't to really analyze the empathetic bond between each of these communities, but I certainly think
Mhm.
it's an essential part to the approach of the art vertical team, is to acknowledge that there's a lot of fear in this space, and the media isn't helping. Their
Right.
inability to speak about this, their inability to articulate what's going on, and or even any benefit to it, is
Mhm.
astonishing. It's absolutely astonishing, and it's incredibly unhelpful.
No, I wholeheartedly agree that there's a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings as to how this all works and everything that's going on under the hood. And until public discourse starts taking the time to actually understand what's happening, we're only going to, live in this era of fear where everyone is going to continue to be skittish and not really understand the merits of what's being built on a level that's a bit more constructive and perhaps more supportive than a almost do or die mentality. But there's these circumstances are going to last a while, unfortunately, at least in my view. And so we've already covered how this is impacting your day-to-day work deeply in terms of the partnerships that you're creating and the people that you're meeting. So to kind of round out this discussion, can you talk to me about what you're currently focused on and what we can see in the next, say, 6 to 12 months?
My focus is really around. I think I've said it a few different ways before, but it's driving the organic growth without being. Um, Sorry, let me backtrack for a second. So it's really driving growth without being inauthentic to the origins and the DNA of that organic growth. And it's a fairly sensitive line to kind of balance oneself on. But the last 8 months that I've been working, I've learned an incredible amount about what's really fundamentally important, where we can also kind of blur the lines, how we can inspire as a form of adoption, because I think that again is authentic to the history and the DNA of the Tezos community. Um, what I hope we can look forward to, despite the doom and gloom and despite all of the challenges ahead, is more use cases in institutions, because that is where people go, right? That's where everyday potential collectors, potential creators find their initial inspiration, right? Or where they go to find solace or even happiness, right? And to be able to convert people through that sort of degree, I think I'm really excited to see what comes out of the Champ Medici Art Fund partnership, as including examples of music, examples of hopefully things like theater, design, opera, really flexing what the medium is, and what is a collectible. What can we collect? Is it always visual art, or is it a combination of visual art and music, or is it a moment of time when a ballerina jumps across stage? All of these different elements of collecting art as well as experience and memory, right? And often artwork we can't collect, we collect through memory, right? Um, and then I think the last puzzle piece to that, if we take the institutional use case and reaching mass audience, to what else are we going to see kind of come up as something that we can own, and that can represent our identities as collectors, but also as creative individuals. I think the third part of this, and it's perhaps the least sexy part, but is really how can the technology itself really help solve those original problems that I saw in my career? How can we start to use blockchain to make sure that estates like that of Helmut Newton, who's a famous photographer, that his legacy is not being violated by opportunists, or that we can help auction houses do their job better, that collectors can start to recognize that they also can do peer-to-peer transactions, because I think we have to also recognize the art world has changed. It used to be that an art dealer held all of his clients in nodes, and those nodes were not communicating. And now all those nodes are on the same yacht having dinner together. And there's a way that this technology can really adapt to how the legacy art world has evolved. And I think we are going to see that. It's a much slower prospect, but it's one that, at least in my one-on-one conversations with collectors, is one that excites them. So that's always the beginning of a vibrant conversation.
Valerie, I feel like that was so eloquently put. Like, I have absolutely no notes for you. I just want to thank you again for everything that we've covered in the discussion, whether it was, the battle between legacy art infrastructure and not trying to recreate those power dynamics onto new technology, but also understanding the power dynamics that seem to be manifesting themselves in that space on its own. You sort of the practices that we need to take across from one art world to the other and back again, and also the relationship that's going to bridge between them in a way that doesn't necessarily merge the two but kind of make them complementary to each other. I feel like in the
Yeah.
last 55 minutes or so, we've covered a lot of ground. So I really want to say thank you
Thank
for
you
all of
so
your
much,
perspectives.
Marissa. I think your ambassadorship through my process. I mean, I know we met very early on when I was brought into the Tezos ecosystem, and the generosity and time and faith that people like yourself. And I'd shout out other people, but I'd probably miss somebody and don't want to risk doing that. It's been a really incredible experience that I can say is unique to Web3. I've never ever in my entire career, whether it be at an auction house, a museum, a gallery, working for private collections, felt what it is to be part of a community. And it has transformed the way that I think about what's possible within this space. And so I really have to say thank you to you and to everyone else who supported me along this journey as well, because we're only just getting started.
And I mean, on that note, I think we will definitely have you on again at a later date where we can kind of catch up on all the latest initiatives that you've spearheaded. But until then, thank you so much, Valerie, and we'll chat again soon.
Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.